a grieving single mother gives her last umbrella to a man soaked in the rain, unaware he is a secret millionaire CEO searching for a reason to live. You can't pay with that. Get out. The rain hammered down against the thin glass of the apartment window, a relentless pounding rhythm that echoed the frantic thudding in Ilara's own chest. Each drop that slid down the pane was like a tear for the life she had lost, for the future that had been stolen, and for the tiny, fragile girl sleeping in the next room, a girl who deserved a world of sunshine and instead was trapped in this endless storm. The flickering light from the single bare bulb in the living room cast long dancing shadows that made their threadbare furniture look even more skeletal, more worn. She clutched the crisp, official-looking paper in her hand, the ink slightly blurred from a single teardrop that had escaped her control. It was an eviction notice. The words were cold, sterile, and final, a verdict on a life that had already been judged too harshly. She had 3 days to find a miracle, in a world that had long ago stopped believing in them. A quiet sob caught in her throat, a raw, painful thing she quickly swallowed down. She could not afford to break. Not now. Not when Lily was depending on her. She had to be strong. In the small adjacent room, her daughter, Lily, slept. Her breathing was a soft, steady whisper in the otherwise oppressive silence of the apartment, a sound that was both a comfort and a crushing weight. Lily was 7 years old, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a smile that could have outshone the sun, but she hadn't taken a step in 2 years. An accident, a cruel twist of fate that had also stolen her husband, had left her daughter paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a small second-hand wheelchair that was becoming too small for her growing frame. Ilara's heart, a shattered mosaic of grief and love, ached with a profound, unbearable tenderness every time she looked at her. Lily never complained. She would sit by the window for hours, her small hands tracing the paths of the raindrops, inventing stories about where they were going. She was the embodiment of innocent resilience, the pure, unwavering moral center of Ilara's crumbling universe. And for her, Ilara would endure anything. She would walk through fire. She would face down the storm. She had to. Ilara moved with a quiet, practiced grace through the cramped space, her movements economical and deliberate. She checked the small pantry, her eyes scanning the meager contents, half a loaf of bread, a can of beans, and a small box of Lily's favorite crackers. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Her job as a seamstress at a high-end boutique had been her lifeline, the one thing keeping their heads above the churning water of debt and medical bills. But 2 days ago, a wealthy client had falsely accused her of stealing a small, ornate brooch, and her boss, fearing a scandal, had dismissed her without a second thought. She was unjustly fired, cast aside without severance, without a reference, without hope. The accusation was a lie, a casual cruelty from a woman who wouldn't even notice the brooch was missing. But the consequences were seismic. They were devastating. Ilara's world had splintered. Her gaze fell upon the small velvet-lined box on her dresser. It was the last thing of value she owned. Inside was a delicate silver locket, a gift from her late husband, Michael. It held 2 tiny, faded photographs, one of him, his smile wide and full of life, and one of a baby Lily, her face chubby and beaming. Selling it felt like a betrayal, like carving out a piece of her own heart and putting a price on it. It was a sacred object, a tangible piece of a love that was supposed to last a lifetime. But Lily's stomach was rumbling, and the landlord's words echoed in her mind. Dignity was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her resolve hardened. She would do what she had to do. She tucked the locket into her pocket, its cool metal a stark contrast to the trembling warmth of her hand. She then pulled on her worn coat, the fabric thin and offering little protection against the biting cold that seeped through the window frames. She found her only umbrella, a sturdy but faded blue thing she'd had for years. It was her shield against the world. She needed it. She crept into Lily's room, the floorboards groaning softly under her weight. Her daughter's face, illuminated by the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the rain-streaked window, was serene in sleep. A single golden curl had fallen across her forehead. Ilara gently brushed it back, her touch as light as a butterfly's wing. "I'll be back soon, my sweet girl," she whispered into the soft hush of the room, her voice cracking with unspoken emotion. "I promise I'll make everything okay." It was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The weight of it was crushing, but she had to try. She left a note on the small table by Lily's bed, next to a glass of water and the little wooden bird Michael had carved for her. The note was simple, written in her neat, steady hand. "Gone for a little while. Be brave. I love you." She closed the apartment door behind her, the soft click of the lock echoing in the empty hallway like a final mournful goodbye. The world outside was a churning chaos of wind and water. She opened the umbrella. It was time to face the storm. The pawn shop was a grim, poorly lit place that smelled of dust and desperation. The man behind the counter, his face a mask of bored indifference, barely glanced at the locket. He offered her a pittance, an amount that was an insult to the memories it held, but Ilara was in no position to bargain. She took the handful of crumpled bills, her hand trembling slightly as she tucked them into her pocket. The transaction was swift and brutal. She felt hollowed out, a part of her soul bartered away for a few more days of survival. She left the shop without a backward glance, stepping back out into the relentless downpour. The money in her pocket felt heavy, tainted. It was enough for a week's worth of groceries, not enough for rent, not enough to fix anything. The brief flicker of hope she had clung to was extinguished, leaving only the cold, damp reality of her situation. The rain seemed to fall harder now, as if the sky itself were weeping for her loss. She walked, her head bowed against the wind, the blue umbrella her only sanctuary in a hostile world. It was on a street corner, huddled beneath the inadequate shelter of a narrow bus-stop awning, that she saw him. He was a tall man, his frame gaunt beneath a simple dark jacket that was soaked through. His face was turned away from the street, his head bowed, but she could see the silver threads in his dark hair glistening with rain. He stood perfectly still, a solitary figure seemingly carved from grief, oblivious to the storm raging around him. He didn't have a coat or an umbrella. He was just standing there, letting the biting cold and the pounding rain wash over him as if he were already a ghost, a man who had forgotten how to seek shelter. There was a profound loneliness about him, a deep, hollow emptiness in his posture that resonated with the aching void in her own heart. He looked like a man who had lost everything. She knew that feeling intimately. It was a language spoken in silence, a kinship of the shattered. For a moment she hesitated. Her own coat was thin, and the walk home was long. Getting sick now would be a catastrophe. She needed the umbrella. It was a practical, necessary tool for her own survival. But then she looked at him again, at the way his shoulders were slumped in utter defeat, and her own suffering was momentarily forgotten. Her heart, though broken, was still capable of a profound and selfless compassion. It was her greatest strength and her most profound vulnerability. Her quiet resolve took over. She walked towards him, her footsteps silent on the wet pavement. She stopped beside him, the blue umbrella creating a small circle of dryness in the deluge. He didn't seem to notice her at all. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear over the drumming of the rain. He turned his head slowly, and for the first time she saw his eyes. They were dark, deep-set, and utterly haunted, filled with a raw, unspoken pain that made her gasp. They were the eyes of a man who had been wandering in the dark for a very, very long time. For a split second, their gazes locked, and in that moment a current of shared sorrow passed between them, an undeniable recognition of two souls adrift in the same unforgiving ocean. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and weary surprise. He seemed to have forgotten where he was. The world had faded away. Without another word, Elara held out the umbrella to him. He stared at it as if he'd never seen one before. "You need this more than I do," she said simply. The statement was a profound truth. In that moment, she believed it with every fiber of her being. He blinked, the rain dripping from his eyelashes. "No, I can't," he stammered, his voice rough as if from disuse. "Please," she insisted, pushing it gently into his hand. "It's just an umbrella. But the cold, it can get into your bones." He looked from the umbrella to her face, a flicker of something unreadable in his hollow eyes. It was a look of stunned disbelief, as if he were witnessing a miracle he had long ago decided was impossible. He saw her worn coat, her pale, weary face, and the quiet dignity in her unwavering gaze. He saw a woman who clearly had next to nothing, offering him her only protection from the storm. This small, unsolicited act of kindness, performed at her own expense with no expectation of reward, was a flash of pure light in the suffocating darkness of his world. It was a seismic event. His cynical, grief-stricken heart, which he thought had turned to stone years ago, cracked. A feeling he couldn't name, something fragile and warm, began to seep through the fissures. He froze. The man, Julian Vance, stood motionless, the worn wooden handle of the umbrella now clutched in his hand. The world around him, which moments before had been a gray, meaningless blur, sharpened into focus with a painful clarity. The sound of the rain on the fabric above him was a gentle drum, a stark contrast to the violent storm that had been raging inside his own soul for 5 long years. He watched as the woman, this stranger with the kind, steady eyes, gave him a small, sincere smile before turning and walking away, pulling the thin collar of her coat tighter around her neck as she melted back into the deluge. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't wait for thanks. She just gave. He opened his mouth to call after her, to ask her name, to give her something, anything, in return, but the words wouldn't come. He was speechless, rooted to the spot by the sheer, unadulterated purity of her gesture. He was Julian Vance, the CEO of Vance Industries, a man whose net worth was measured in billions, a man who lived in a cavernous, stately mansion filled with priceless art and sterile silence. He could buy anything he wanted, command armies of employees, bend markets to his will. But in that moment, holding a faded blue umbrella, he felt a poverty of spirit so profound it made him dizzy. This woman, who possessed nothing, had just given him everything. She was gone. Elara arrived back at her apartment, her clothes soaked through and clinging to her skin. A deep chill had settled into her bones, and she was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the emotional exhaustion of the day. The pawned locket, the eviction notice, the encounter with the stranger, it all swirled together in a haze of weary despair. She checked on Lily, who was still sleeping soundly, a small, peaceful island in her mother's turbulent sea. Elara changed into dry clothes, her movements slow and heavy. She made herself a cup of weak tea, the warmth of the mug doing little to chase away the cold that had taken root deep inside her. By morning, the chill had blossomed into a raging fever. Her head pounded, her body ached, and a dry, racking cough tore at her throat. She was too sick to get out of bed, too weak to even think about searching for a new job. The 3-day deadline on the eviction notice loomed like a guillotine. A wave of unbearable despair washed over her. She had tried to be strong. She had tried to fight. But the world was relentless. She had failed. She had failed her daughter. The tears she had held back for so long finally came, silent and hot, soaking her pillow. She felt herself slipping into darkness. Meanwhile, across the city, in a gleaming, polished office that overlooked the rain-swept skyline, Julian Vance was a man reborn. The hollow, haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a spark of intense, unwavering purpose. The faded blue umbrella stood propped against his vast mahogany desk, a sacred relic in a temple of corporate power. It was a constant, tangible reminder of the moment his life had changed. He had spent 5 years wandering through the fog of his grief after losing his wife, Amelia, and his son Leo in a horrific car accident. His wealth had become a gilded cage, isolating him from a world he no longer saw any beauty in. He was a ghost in his own life, going through the motions, his heart a cold, dead weight in his chest. But the woman in the rain, her selfless act had been a defibrillator to his dormant soul. It was a sign that goodness still existed, that purity wasn't just a memory, that there was still light to be found in the darkest of corners. He now had a mission, a purpose that consumed him. He had to find her. He had to repay her kindness, not with money, but with the security and peace she so clearly lacked and so richly deserved. It was the first thing he had wanted, truly wanted, in 5 years. He summoned his most trusted executive assistant, a sharp, incredibly efficient woman named Evelyn. He described the encounter in meticulous detail: the street corner, the time of day, the woman's approximate age, her worn coat, her pale, tired face, and, most importantly, the quiet, dignified light in her eyes. "Find her, Evelyn," he said, his voice imbued with a commanding authority she hadn't heard since before the accident. "Use every resource we have. I don't care what it costs. Find the woman who gave me this umbrella." Evelyn, seeing the fire back in her boss's eyes for the first time in years, simply nodded. "Consider it done, Mr. Vance." The search began. It was a vast and complex operation, employing private investigators and leveraging Vance Industries' formidable data analysis capabilities. They cross-referenced security camera footage, tracked down the pawn shop owner, and pieced together the fragments of Alara's life. Within 24 hours, Evelyn stood before Julian's desk with a slim, crisp file. Her name is Alara. She has a 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who is paraplegic. She lost her husband 2 years ago. She was fired from her job this week and is facing eviction in 2 days. Julian read the report, his jaw clenching tighter with every heartbreaking detail. His initial intrigue had morphed into a fierce, protective urgency. He saw the full picture of her desperation, and it made her act of kindness seem even more miraculous, more profound. He knew he couldn't just approach her and hand her a check. That would be transactional, an insult to the purity of her gift. His intervention had to be as gentle and selfless as her own. It had to be a quiet miracle. That afternoon, a plain white envelope appeared under Alara's apartment door. Her name was written on it in neat, block letters. With a trembling hand, she opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for an amount that made her gasp, enough to cover her rent for the next 6 months. Tucked alongside it was a small typewritten note. It read, "Kindness should be rewarded. Don't worry about the rent. Focus on your daughter. From a friend." There was no signature, no return address. Alara stared at the check, then at the note, her mind reeling. She sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. A miracle. A real, tangible miracle had just landed on her doorstep. She didn't understand it. She couldn't explain it. But for the first time in a long time, she could breathe. The heavy weight on her chest lifted, replaced by a fragile, shimmering hope. The next day, another miracle arrived. A phone call from the city's most prestigious pediatric physical therapy center. A woman with a warm, professional voice explained that a fully funded charity spot had opened up in their most advanced program, and Lily's name had been selected from a list of candidates. The program, which included state-of-the-art equipment and the country's top specialists, was something Alara had only dreamed of, something that was impossibly out of her reach. Now it was being offered to them free of charge. Ilara accepted, her voice thick with emotion. She didn't know who this friend was, but they were an angel, a hidden savior, who had swooped in and saved them from the brink of oblivion. She felt a profound sense of wonder. Julian monitored everything from a distance, a quiet, unseen guardian. He felt a satisfaction that all his billions had never been able to buy. He wasn't just fixing her problems with money, he was giving her back her life, her dignity. But it wasn't enough. He found himself wanting to see her again, to talk to her, to understand the source of her incredible strength and grace. He wanted to know the woman, not just the symbol of kindness she had become in his mind. He learned Lily's therapy schedule and arranged his own to coincidentally overlap. He shed his commanding CEO persona, dressing in simple, comfortable clothes, jeans and a soft sweater that made him look more like a university professor than a titan of industry. He wanted her to see him as a person, not as a source of power or wealth. He wanted to earn her trust. He found her sitting on a park bench just outside the therapy center, the golden afternoon sunlight filtering through the leaves of a large oak tree, dappling the ground in a mosaic of light and shadow. She was watching the entrance to the center with a look of anxious hope on her face. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her features softened by the warm light, a quiet strength radiating from her. His heart, the one he thought was long dead, gave a painful thud. He approached slowly, his hands in his pockets, affecting a casual air he did not feel. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, his voice calm and gentle. She looked up, startled, and her eyes widened slightly in recognition, though she couldn't quite place him. "Yes, it is," she replied, her voice a soft melody. He gestured to the empty space on the bench. "Do you mind if I sit? I'm just waiting for a friend." It was a half-truth. She nodded, and he sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a few moments they sat in a comfortable silence, watching children play on the nearby lawn. "You're waiting for your daughter?" he asked, his tone one of genuine curiosity. She smiled, a real radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "Yes, her name is Lily. She's in her first session at the new therapy center." There was so much pride and love in her voice, it was almost tangible. "She's been through a lot," Ilara added, her gaze turning distant for a moment. "But she's the strongest person I know." Julian felt an irresistible urge to know more about her, about them. "I'm Julian," he said, offering his hand. "Ilara," she replied, taking it. Her hand was warm, her grip firm. The simple physical contact sent a jolt through him, a current of warmth and life. They started talking, the conversation flowing easily, naturally. He asked about Lily, and Ilara, feeling an inexplicable sense of safety and trust with this gentle stranger, found herself opening up. She told him about Michael, about the life they had planned, about the sudden violent accident that had taken him from them and shattered Lily's body. She spoke of her struggles, the loneliness, the constant fear. But she did so without a trace of self-pity. Her words were filled with a quiet, dignified resolve, a testament to her unwavering love for her daughter. Julian listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen, truly heard. His eyes, which she now saw were not just haunted, but also incredibly deep and empathetic, never left her face. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. He just listened, his silent presence a comforting anchor in the turbulent waters of her memory. When a small cart selling hot tea passed by, he bought them both a cup, and the simple, warm gesture felt more comforting than any words could have been. The amber hue of the setting sun cast long shadows across the park. The soft hush of the evening began to settle around them. Sensing a moment of profound trust, Julian decided to reciprocate. "I understand loss," he said, his voice low and raw with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I had a wife, Amelia, And a son, Leo. He would have been 12 this year. He paused, the words catching in his throat. Alara's heart went out to him. She could see the deep, unhealed wound behind his calm facade. He told her about the accident, a different one from hers, but just as senseless, just as cruel. He spoke of the suffocating silence of his large house, the unbearable emptiness of a life that had once been so full of laughter and love. He confessed his own profound loneliness, the feeling of being a ghost haunting the ruins of his own happiness. As he spoke, Alara saw past the handsome, kind stranger and into the heart of a man who was just as broken as she was. Their tragedies were different, but their grief was the same. They were two survivors of life's cruelest storms, and in that shared understanding, a powerful, unspoken bond was forged. It wasn't pity they felt for each other, but a deep and resonant empathy. The confession scene was not one of tears, but of quiet, mutual recognition. When it was time for her to go and get Lily, he simply placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for sharing that with me, Alara," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "It's been a long time since I've talked to anyone." She nodded, unable to speak, her heart full. The brief touch lingered long after he had let go. Total silence. Their meetings in the park became a regular occurrence, a quiet ritual that both of them came to cherish. Alara found herself looking forward to her conversations with Julian, this kind, enigmatic man, who listened so intently and spoke with such gentle wisdom. He never pried, but he had a way of asking questions that made her feel safe enough to share her deepest fears and her most fragile hopes. She told him about the anonymous benefactor, the angel who had paid her rent and secured Lily's therapy spot. "I don't know who it is," she confessed one afternoon, her brow furrowed in wonder. "But I wish I could thank them. They didn't just give me money, they gave me back my faith in people." Julian simply smiled, a secret warmth spreading through his chest. He was falling in love with her, not just for her kindness to him in the rain, but for her resilience, her grace, her unwavering spirit. He was beginning to imagine a future, something he hadn't dared to do in years, a future with her and Lily. But he knew he had to tell her the truth. The foundation of their budding relationship couldn't be built on a secret, no matter how well-intentioned. He was just waiting for the right moment. That moment, however, was chosen for him. The news of Alara's sudden turn of fortune had reached the ears of Mrs. Gable, her former mother-in-law. Mrs. Gable was a woman carved from ice and arrogance, a personification of cruel elitism who had always looked down on Alara. She blamed Alara for the death of her son, Michael, and saw her as nothing more than a gold-digger who had trapped him. She had tried to gain custody of Lily after the accident, not out of love, but out of a twisted sense of ownership, a desire to possess the last living piece of her son. The courts had sided with Alara, a decision Mrs. Gable had never forgiven. Now, hearing that the destitute woman she so despised was suddenly flush with cash and that her granddaughter was in a top-tier medical facility, her suspicion and fury ignited. She was convinced Alara was manipulating some rich man, using her daughter as bait. It was a vile thought, born of her own transactional view of the world. She decided to confront her, to expose her for the fraud she was sure she was. She chose the physical therapy center for her attack, a place where Alara would be at her most vulnerable, a public stage for her intended humiliation. Alara was in the brightly lit, cheerful waiting room of the center, her heart filled with a quiet joy. Lily's therapist had just told her that her daughter was showing remarkable progress, that for the first time there was a real possibility she might one day walk again with the help of advanced leg braces. The news was a sunbeam breaking through the clouds, and Alara was basking in its warmth. Suddenly, the doors to the waiting room burst open, and Mrs. Gable swept in, her face a mask of cold fury, her presence sucking all the warmth and light from the room. "There you are," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Elara froze, her blood turning to ice. "Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice a near whisper, "what are you doing here?" Mrs. Gable laughed, a short, ugly sound. "I'm here to see the miracle for myself. Tell me, Elara, which rich old fool did you manage to sink your claws into this time? Who are you conning to pay for all this?" The accusation, so loud and vicious, echoed through the now silent room. The other parents and staff members turned to stare, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Elara's face went pale. She stood up, her body trembling, but her voice was steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Aren't you?" "Oh, don't play innocent with me," Mrs. Gable sneered, taking a step closer, her eyes glinting with malice. "You are nothing, a charity case living off the pity of strangers. Do you really think you're a fit mother? You couldn't even keep my son alive, and now you're using his crippled daughter as a pawn in your pathetic games." The words were like physical blows, each one striking Elara's heart, stealing her breath. She winced, but she held her ground, her gaze unflinching. "You will not speak about Lily that way," she said, her quiet voice filled with a mother's fierce, protective fire. "And you will not do this here." But Mrs. Gable was relentless. She was enjoying the spectacle, the public humiliation of the woman she loathed. "I will do as I please. You are unfit to raise my grandchild. I will see to it that she is taken away from you and placed in a proper home with people who can actually afford to care for her." Elara was surrounded, trapped by the stares of strangers and the venom of this cruel woman. She felt the walls closing in, the familiar tide of despair threatening to drown her. She was dignified, but she was visibly overwhelmed, her fragile hope beginning to splinter. Just as a tear threatened to trace a path down her pale cheek, a sleek, black car pulled up to the curb outside, silent as a phantom. The door opened, and Julian Vance stepped out. He was no longer the gentle, unassuming man from the park. He was dressed in an impeccable, custom-tailored suit of dark charcoal gray, his posture exuding a calm but commanding power. He moved with the effortless confidence of a man who was used to being in charge, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the entire street. He walked into the therapy center, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. His eyes, cold and hard as obsidian, were fixed on Mrs. Gable. He made a dramatic entrance, calm but powerful, a hidden savior stepping out of the shadows and into the light. The room fell into an even deeper hush as he approached, his gaze never wavering. He came to a stop directly beside Elara, placing a steadying hand on her arm. She gasped, looking up at him in stunned confusion. He was the man from the park, but he was also a complete stranger, a figure of immense and undeniable power. "Mrs. Gable," Julian's voice was low, but it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel, sharp and precise. "I believe you were just leaving." The older woman stared at him, momentarily speechless, taken aback by his sudden appearance and authoritative tone. "And who do you think you are?" she finally sputtered, trying to regain her footing. Julian's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "I am the rich old fool Elara has supposedly sunk her claws into," he said, his voice resonating with controlled power. "My name is Julian Vance. I am the founder and CEO of Vance Industries, and I am the friend who believes in kindness." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The name was legendary in the city. Mrs. Gable's face went from red with fury to a sickly, mottled white. She was speechless. Julian continued, his monologue a powerful defense of Elara's character and a complete evisceration of Mrs. Gable's cruelty. "Every good thing that has happened to this woman in the past weeks is because of me," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "Not because she asked for it, not because she manipulated me, but because she earned it with a single, unsolicited act of selfless generosity that reminded me what it means to be human again." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He looked at Elara, his eyes softening with a profound tenderness, before turning back to Mrs. Gable, his expression once again like granite. Weeks ago I was a man lost in a storm, both literally and figuratively. I had given up. This woman, who had nothing, who was on the brink of losing everything, saw a stranger in need and gave me her only umbrella, her only protection from the rain, and asked for nothing in return. She saved me. You, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, who have everything, have never shown a single ounce of her grace, her dignity, or her compassion. He then delivered the final decisive blow, completely reversing the power dynamic. So, let me be perfectly clear. Lily will have the best medical care in the world for the rest of her life. Elara will never have to worry about money or security again. They are under my protection now, and you, he said, his gaze unwavering, will never harass them again. If you so much as speak her name in a disparaging way, I will bring the full weight of my legal and financial resources down upon you. Do you understand me? Two large, discreetly dressed men, Julian's personal security, had entered the room, and now stood on either side of a trembling Mrs. Gable. She could only nod, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. "Good," Julian said softly. "Now get out." The security guards gently but firmly escorted the humiliated woman from the building. The salvation was complete. The waiting room was thick with a stunned, cathartic silence. Everyone stared at Julian and Elara, the epicenter of the drama that had just unfolded. Elara looked up at Julian, her mind a whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, incredible understanding. "The man in the rain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That was you?" He nodded, his expression softening as he looked down at her, all the power and command draining away to be replaced by the gentle warmth she knew from the park. "That was me," he confirmed. "You gave me your umbrella. You changed everything, Elara." The pieces clicked into place. The anonymous rent payments, the call from the therapy center, his coincidental appearances in the park. It was all him. He was her angel, her hidden savior. The truth was so much bigger, so much more overwhelming than she could have ever imagined. Before she could process the seismic shift in her reality, the door to the therapy room opened, and Lily emerged in her small wheelchair, her face beaming. "Mommy, Doctor, Anya said I moved my toes, all by myself." Lily's triumphant, innocent voice cut through the heavy emotional atmosphere, a pure, joyful sound that brought tears to Elara's eyes. Julian knelt down, bringing himself to Lily's eye level. "That's amazing, Lily," he said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "You are so strong." Lily looked from Julian to her mother and back again, her perceptive eyes taking in the charged silence. "Are you my mommy's friend?" she asked. Julian smiled, a real heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "I hope so," he said, his gaze lifting to meet Elara's. "I very much hope so." He took them away from the scene, away from the prying eyes, driving them not to their cramped apartment, but to his own stately, cavernous home. It was a place of quiet, polished elegance, but Elara could see the undercurrent of loneliness that clung to the ornate furniture and high ceilings. In the vast, quiet living room, with Lily happily occupied with a sketchbook and new colored pencils that Julian's housekeeper had magically produced, he finally told her everything. He explained who he was, the full extent of his wealth and power, but he spoke of it as a burden he had carried, not a prize he had won. He told her about the 5 years of darkness after losing his family, the profound cynicism and despair that had consumed him. "I wasn't just standing in the rain that day, Elara," he confessed, his voice raw and vulnerable. "I was drowning. I had lost all hope in the world and people, in myself. And then you appeared, your kindness. It was like a lighthouse in the darkest night of my life. It wasn't about the umbrella. It was about the fact that you, who had so much less than me, were willing to give. It was pure. It was real." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "You didn't just save me from the cold, Elara. You saved me from myself." Elara listened, her heart aching with empathy for the pain he had endured. She understood now that his grand gestures were not charity. They were an expression of his own healing, his own reawakening. He had needed to give just as she had. "And our talks in the park," she asked softly, "was that all a lie?" "No," he said, shaking his head emphatically. "That was the most real thing I've experienced in years. I wanted to know you, the real you. I fell in love with your strength, your grace, your heart, long before I ever thought about telling you the truth." The words hung in the air between them, a tender, undeniable declaration. "I love you, Elara," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "Not because I feel I owe you something, but because you have shown me what it means to live again. I know this is sudden and overwhelming, but I want to be a part of your life and Lily's life, if you'll have me." Elara looked at this man, this powerful CEO, this grieving father, this kind stranger, this hidden savior, and she saw the truth of him. She saw the good, sincere man she had connected with on a park bench, the man who shared her grief and understood her heart. Tears glistened in her eyes as a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Julian." In that moment, all the hardship, all the suffering faded away, replaced by the profound, cathartic promise of a new beginning. Hope had returned. 1 year later, the golden glow of late afternoon sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a beautiful, light-filled home. The house was not cavernous or sterile like Julian's old mansion. It was filled with warmth, laughter, and the happy clutter of family life. In a specially designed therapy room, equipped with state-of-the-art parallel bars and soft, padded floors, a miracle was taking place. Lily, her face a mask of fierce concentration, her small hands gripping the bars, took a slow, deliberate step. Then another. She was wearing advanced, sleek leg braces, but the legs moving inside them were her own. Elara and Julian stood in the doorway, their hands intertwined, watching with tears of joy in their eyes. A physical therapist cheered Lily on, but Lily's gaze was fixed on her mother and the man who had become her father in every way that mattered. "I'm doing it," she shouted, her voice ringing with a triumph that filled every corner of the house. "I'm walking." Julian wrapped his arm around Elara, pulling her close. "She's so strong," he murmured, his voice thick with pride and love. "She gets it from her mother," Elara replied, leaning her head against his shoulder, her heart overflowing with a deep, quiet security she had never thought she would feel again. They were no longer two broken souls defined by their tragedies. They were a family forged in a storm and healed by the profound redemptive power of selfless love. Their life was idyllic, a testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that the purest light often shines brightest after the darkest night. They were home. This story is a testament to the profound and often unseen power of a single act of kindness. It is a universal fable that reminds us that in a world that can often feel cold and transactional, the most valuable currency we possess is our compassion. Elara, at her lowest point with nothing to her name, performed a selfless act that created ripples she could never have imagined. Her small gift of an umbrella didn't just save a man from a storm, it reawakened a dormant soul and, in turn, saved her and her daughter from a life of despair. It is a story of how pure-hearted resilience can triumph over profound hardship, and how love, in its most unassuming form, can be the most powerful agent of miraculous, life-altering salvation. If this story touched your heart, it's because it speaks to a fundamental truth we all recognize, that our connections to one another are what give our lives meaning. It is a reminder that you never truly know the battles others are fighting, and that a simple gesture of generosity can be the lifeline someone is desperately praying for. The love between Elara and Julian was not born of romance, but forged in the crucible of shared grief and mutual healing, a bond made sacred by an act of pure, unselfish giving. We invite you to carry the spirit of this story with you. For more soul-stirring tales of love, redemption, and the incredible power of the human heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to continue creating inspiring stories that celebrate the best of humanity. We'll see you in the next one.